We got a guy, Ike Feldman, here who used to work with us. He works at the Sports Network. He fought last week and won.
Winner by knockout from Long Island, New York, Ike Feldman.
Here's the problem with that. Now with the proliferation of MMA,
Yes.
you ain't got anybody.
You have no idea.
Because that dude Isaac, who's a great kid,
Yeah.
you'd look at him and go, I'll probably have this guy. I can handle this guy.
He'd kill you in
Meanwhile,
30 seconds.
What?
Right.
Hi-ya! No, like, God damn, I had the wrong guy.
Welcome to the IkeTagon.
What's up, everybody? Ike Feldman here from the IkeTagon. Of course, you know me from the IkeTagon. I've done many episodes, podcasting, video podcast, but we got some huge and amazing news. We were picked up by the great and powerful, the wonderful, forward-thinking podcast network, the Bleav podcast network. It's the #1 podcast network out in LA. It's fantastic. They're forward-thinking. I'm forward-thinking. We're both forward-thinking. So let's not move. Why not move forward together? Let's not waste any time. Move forward. Well, thank you guys for picking me up and agreeing that the IkeTagon is a fantastic and amazing product, and why not bolster the views and subscriptions of your own podcast network by bringing in MMA commentator, MMA expert, and the savvy Ike Feldman. That's me. I'm done. No more third person. Okay, well, the show is going to be different than former IkeTagon episodes. I will be bringing in a lot more guests, a lot more friends, colleagues, fighters, personalities. I will do it all. And from this episode or this period of time is ever evolving and always folding. Matthew McConaughey and Interstellar. We're going to do a lot more than what I was previously doing on the IkeTagon. So, I mean, films, fights, entertainment, other sports, friends, colleagues, guests. So what I was trying to get at, I'm just so excited. Let me drink some more coffee. It'll probably calm me down. I got to do that for the audio listeners. Lean into the mic, give them what they want. Me slurping coffee into their eardrums. But this version of the IkeTagon, and remember, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Go to the website, IkeTagon.com. Everything, IkeTagon, IkeTagon. It's blowing up. If you're not subscribing, you're missing out, because this will be the best version. Audio drops, video drops, radio podcast beefs that you guys haven't seen or heard about, because apparently some people in the MMA world do not like my words because the truth hurts, and I will explain more about that moving forward. But the IkeTagon is here to stay, and Bleav Podcast Network is here to stay. So we are teamed up, and during this period in time, and for this podcast until whenever, next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. Ugh, imagine something goes 8 weeks. I'll have a conniption. If it goes 8 weeks, that'd be a long time. But the Bleav Podcast Network and I, Ike Feldman, we are efforting to find me a fantastic co-host. The plan is to make it a UFC fighter currently on the roster who's media savvy, who's smart on the mic, who enjoys long, drawn out, not boring, but long, drawn out conversations, fixated around the fight world, sprinkled in with some entertainment and stories and the in the know type of stuff. So there will be a co-host. It won't just be me screaming at you and playing audio clips, but there will be a co-host, preferably a fighter. If it's just a personality, I guess I could deal with it, but you guys got to deal with me for now. So That's the news. That's the update. That's the story. Everything that you hear and see will be coming from the mind of Ike. And eventually, when there is a co-host on this, I guess I will hand over some of the reins of the decision-making, business, creativity, and whatnot, I guess. But you better be creative and business savvy, because then I won't listen much, ever, at all. I will listen some, of course. But he'll have to, if he taps me out 5 times in 5 minutes, then he'll get a lot more control, or she. They'll get a lot more control over this podcast, but they have to be able to tap me out. Okay. I'm a 160-pound blue belt, about to be a purple belt. I'm in good shape. I got good balance. I can break dance a little, but if they can't tap me out 5 times in 5 minutes, then, and I won't hold. I won't hold a position. I like action and flow when I roll. So if they can submit me 5 times in 5 minutes, I will give them full control of the IkeTagon content, views, opinion, direction. I promise. So UFC 249 happened. Thank goodness. I did not believe it would happen. I needed to see the first fight, which was Ryan Spann versus Sam Alvey. I needed to see some leather being thrown, some grappling being incorporated, a referee, Bruce Buffer, the announcers, everything in place. And it did happen. Oh, my goodness. And it was an amazing card. It was missing the fans. And I disagree with Ariel Helwani on that. We'll get to that and more. But what an amazing event. It came together. Jacare Souza, Ronaldo Souza, tested positive, not for steroids, which I wonder what would have made more headlines if he tested positive for steroids, which he didn't, but he tested positive for COVID-19, which he did. And that made a ton of headlines. It actually made so many headlines that CBS Sports Radio asked me to come on for a national radio spot to talk about the situation. And I had a simple answer. What does this affect? And I go, the money, nothing. The money will continue to roll on. The UFC will do everything in their power even more extensively to make sure the event goes forward. Jacare tested positive for COVID-19. Remember, he's a former Strikeforce belt contender against Luke Rockhold, Gegard Mousasi. He has fought the who's who in Strikeforce and UFC. He's a formidable middleweight and sometimes light heavyweight. Jacare is a legend inside of mixed martial arts and one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners of all time, and arguably the best jiu-jitsu practitioner in mixed martial arts history. So he's respectable. I'm sure he's frustrated that he tested positive for COVID-19 and his fight didn't come to fruition against Queens native Uriah Hall, but the fight will be rescheduled. Something will happen. Somebody will get paid and compensated. It's unfortunate that he couldn't fight, but what was fortunate is that Dana White pushed through and got us back to some type of normalcy, which was UFC 249 and a fight event, essentially. This fight event was supposed to take place April 18th inside the Barclays Center. It was going to be one of the biggest pay-per-views, one of the biggest mixed martial arts events in MMA history. Khabib Nurmagomedov, undefeated in the UFC, undefeated overall, was taking on Tony Ferguson, undefeated in the last 8 years. His last loss was to Michael Johnson, I believe, in the Ultimate Fighter finale. And since then, he's been on a tear at 170 and 155. And one thing I do have to give Ariel Helwani credit for was he was concerned about Tony Ferguson making weight on April 17th, which was the original date that Tony Ferguson had to weigh in for the UFC 249 card in Brooklyn, New York. We all know what happened, and the pandemic happened, and life got paused. Tony Ferguson, being the insane, savage warrior that steps into a cage for a day job, he decided to make weight there was no reason for him to make weight, and even posted on social media, even if he was down to 158 pounds, which is 3 pounds off the limit, he didn't have to post it. He probably still would have. But he posted that he made the weight April 17th, the day before the original scheduled fight. Ariel Helwani was saying he doesn't believe it's smart, doesn't see the the pro of making the weight and draining your body and sacrificing some time and efforts into something that may not matter. Daniel Cormier, his co-host, kind of believed that it's just Tony being Tony. In my opinion, to elaborate on what Tony being Tony means, is it's mental warfare. And if Tony Ferguson's opponent, Justin Gaethje, his new opponent, Justin Gaethje, saw this weight cut on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and saw that Tony made weight, maybe it's like, oh my gosh, this guy's a savage. This guy's got so much extra mentally and physically in the tank that he can sacrifice a whole nother weight cut just to make a point. And it turned out Gaethje was not impressed, and it turns out Ariel Helwani was probably onto something, that Tony Ferguson sacrificed something when he made weight about 3 weeks before he was actually supposed to fight. So he made weight twice, the 155-pound limit, twice within 3 weeks. And for those of you that don't know, he walks around north of 185 pounds, probably closer to 195 pounds, which is 30 to 40 pounds above the weight that he cuts down to. Now, I'm not saying in between the two weight cuts, the 3 week separation, that he was 155 and then he bounced all the way up to 190 and then he cut all the way back down to 155 and then bounced back up to 190 for fight night. No. Daniel Cormier was also saying this, and this is courtesy of ESPN MMA, the Ariel Helwani MMA show. It's now dubbed the Ariel and DC show or whatever. I hope it sticks. It's a fantastic product, and I love picking audio pieces from it because Ariel hasn't had a co-host. Chael Sonnen is, but they kind of just scream at each other for 25 minutes. DC and Ariel, they have a lot more respect and they're a lot more cordial about their conversation. It's perfect. I'm sure the respect's there with Chael Sonnen and Ariel Helwani, but it's not made for radio. DC and Helwani are made for radio, and they've spoken on ESPN radio, so they know what they're doing over there. But Daniel Cormier was ready for Tony Ferguson to show up on fight night and be Tony Ferguson, but there was something missing in there, and it showed. His body looked bad. It looked drained. It looked emaciated. Tony Ferguson was not being Tony Ferguson. He was a depreciated form of Tony Ferguson. And what I was alluding to about a minute ago, Ferguson, in between the weight cut, I'm sure did not bounce back up to north of 180 pounds. DC was also saying this on a show with Helwani, that he probably floated back up 15 to 20 pounds in the 170s. And he was reasserting to Helwani that wrestlers do this all the time. They have to make weight every week, and it's never an off week when you're in a wrestling season for college or for high school, and that this was just another walk in the park for Ferguson. It was not. And Ferguson looked bad. When you cut that much weight, and I haven't cut more than 15 pounds, but when you're cutting down from 20, 25, 30 pounds, it can take a toll on you. And if you're not fighting the next day, when you're probably still in the clear in terms of catching something, whether it's mono or the flu, you can still perform pretty well. The bad thing about Ferguson is that he had 3 weeks. And what happened in that 3 weeks? We've heard this number about 9 days, 12 days, 14 days, 37 days in some cases, about COVID-19, the coronavirus living in your system. Was that lingering in Tony's system because his immune system was depleted and the door was wide open for a virus to creep right into Tony Ferguson's system and affect his performance, which it could have? We won't find out about any of this until he does an interview. So I expect Ariel Helwani to get Tony Ferguson on the line once he recovers and find out exactly what happened, because Tony Ferguson was not Tony Ferguson in that fight this past Saturday. So we will find out more, but hats off to Ariel Helwani for saying maybe cutting weight was not the best idea 3 weeks before you had to. And I was so ready to say, Ariel, you're wrong. Suck it. You're wrong, buddy. You really screwed up. You don't know what you're talking about. But Ferguson did look awful, and it was probably connected or correlated to the weight cut 3 weeks earlier. So moving on. That's just neither here nor there. We'll find out more about it, I'm sure, as the weeks unfold. What we do know is Henry Cejudo is retiring. Huh? This dude just goes out there, stops the former bantamweight king in Dominic Cruz inside of 2 rounds, does it by similar fashion, a stunning leap-in strike, similar fashion that he did to TJ Dillashaw. He leaped in for a strike, and then he just closed the door with a cross-hip hold, not a gift wrap, but it was initially a gift wrap against Cruz, but the similarities between the TJ Dillashaw and Cruz fight was hugging the cross hip and then just hammer fisting TJ and Dominic until the refs stepped in there. And again, very, very similar controversy from the TJ Dillashaw fight back in January 2019 to the fight this past weekend at UFC 249 against Dominic Cruz. I agree with the stoppage. I 100% agree with the stoppage. It was about 11 to 13 unanswered strikes, and Dominic Cruz was making his way north, back to his feet. That was his argument. But 11 strikes, you lost the round 100%. You were losing the fight. How much more damage did you want to take? In those 2 seconds, Henry Cejudo could have probably thrown at least 3 more strikes. So now you're talking 13 to 16 unanswered strikes. And yes, he'd be saved by the bell. And yes, it could have been an epic comeback by Dominic Cruz in the 3rd round and maybe an epic victory. But Henry Cejudo would have also recovered. And I think Henry Cejudo is a different cat. I don't think he mentally lets down in between the 2nd and 3rd round and comes out there lackluster because he thinks he has a lead and he starts to kind of just sit back on his laurels. How many times have we seen Henry Cejudo face adversity? I put a tweet out there and just bounce back strongly, whether it's outside or inside the cage. We heard about how broke he was while he was wrestling. We heard about the California fires when he had to jump out of his window. He just fought and beat a steroid user in TJ Dillashaw. He butted heads with Dominic Cruz right before the stoppage. Blood pouring down his face. He still comes out there and stopped Dominic Cruz 20 seconds after that. This cat was not going to be shaken by a fight going back to the corner and he thinks he wins and he's going to let his guard down. Not at all. I think he figured out the game plan of Dominic Cruz. We saw Cody Garbrandt's boxing and his bobbing and weaving. He caught Dominic Cruz and figured out the drunken monkey type of fighting style. Henry Cejudo figured out by just chopping the legs. The legs will always be there on the same plane, so he decided to just chop that same plane and catch Dominic Cruz's legs. And Cruz actually admitted in an interview with Hawani that he was sore, not mentally, not his brain. I'm sure it was, but he wouldn't admit that, but his legs. And that it would take about a week to be fully recovered. So Henry Cejudo had the path to victory already, and he just capitalized on a 10-second flurry of strikes. And Dominic Cruz is saying that Henry Cejudo capitalized on a drunk and cigarette-smoking refereeing Keith Peterson. And that's very unfair to Keith Peterson because he has a respectable career and body of work. And John Anik, who calls the fights with Daniel Cormier and Joe Rogan, he defended Keith Peterson. And Dominic Cruz went extensively in the behind-the-scenes look at the locker room between the fighter and the referee, what is being seen and what's being told, what's being reiterated over and over. And Dominic Cruz was saying that he could tell that Keith Peterson was off and that maybe he smelt of cigarettes and alcohol. And that is a huge accusation. And you better be right. You better have some background about or knowledge about this accusation because you are putting a man's reputation on the line In a media law book, they would call this libel and character assassination. I mean, it doesn't look good, the fact that you were stopped and that you lost, and maybe you're just pulling on to threads to try to make a point, or you're a little bit of a sore loser. A lot of people commended Dominic Cruz for how he handled his loss against Cody Garbrandt back in December of 2016, UFC 207, for taking it on the chin and being a man and addressing it, not running away like he Ronda Rousey from the media and facing the media. And this is not a good look, but you better have cold, hard facts if you're accusing of a respectable referee in Keith Peterson of being drunk the night before and smelling like cigarettes. So slippery slope for Dominic Cruz, but for Henry Cejudo, he retires in front of no fans. It's like, wow, you know, if this was on his mind, he would have thought he would have waited for crowds to come back, but no, he is the co-main event of UFC 249. The money was good enough and the opportunity was perfect and the timing was there that he felt it was just proper to retire at this moment in time. And outside of the triple C, the triple cringe, the king cringe, captain cringe, whatever people who don't like Henry Cejudo's social media prowess want to call him, forget about it. It's over and done with. Let's move on. Let's respect and appreciate the champion that he is. He's not only a two-time Olympic gold medalist, but he came back from adversity after he lost from Mighty Mouse, Demetrius Johnson, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. He came back, and since UFC 227, he beat DJ Mighty Mouse Demetrius Johnson. He then beat TJ Dillashaw. He then moved up in weight and became a 2-division simultaneous champion when he beat Marlon Moraes. And now he beats the bantamweight king in Dominic Cruz. He may come back in the future if Aldo is at the top, or if TJ Dillashaw wants a rematch, or if Dominic Cruz crawls up again, or if Alexander Volkanovski or another featherweight is presentable to Henry Cejudo, or he may even box. Whatever he wants to do, Henry Cejudo has options, and it's just amazing to see a great guy outside of his social media antics to get the due, and I hope he gets the praise. And I hope this cloud of Dominic Cruz being a sore loser just disappears, because we should be commending the winner and not giving the sore loser their attention. So hats off to Henry Cejudo. Good job to you, brother. In the main event, Justin freaking Gaethje keeps his patience and gets it done. Beats an all-time great in Tony Ferguson. Holy crap, Justin Gaethje has now won 4 in a row. He's an interim UFC lightweight champion. He threw away the belt. I know that was maybe in the moment, the adrenaline was going, but a day or two after, he's seen wearing the belt. So he does appreciate, and he is showing gratitude by wearing the belt, and he's, I'm sure, thrilled and stunned about his accomplishment on Saturday night. So good job to you, Justin Gaethje. That's pretty amazing, brother. And he, if you don't know, he comes from the same team as Rose Namajunas and Pat Barry and JJ Aldridge out in Denver, Colorado, and they are coordinated or coached or mentored by the great Trevor Whitman. Trevor Whitman, who not only is a fantastic coach, but he does commentary in between rounds for ESPN MMA. And Trevor is a fantastic guy. From everything I've seen from the Ultimate Fighter 10 with Rashad Evans. Yeah, if you don't remember, Trevor Whitman is worked with Rashad Evans, and Rashad Evans is a former UFC champion. Trevor's a different style of thinker and fight coach. He isn't the rah-rah guy, but he will tell you exactly what you need to hear when you need to hear it. And the best and most recent example of this was when Justin Gaethje was up on the scorecards. He was tagging Tony Ferguson. He felt everything Tony Ferguson had. He saw the dance moves and the smoke and mirrors that Tony Ferguson can present with some rolls some funky switching of stances, some quirky punches and elbows and kicks and teep kicks and movement, and the way he does his footwork and circles. Justin Gaethje stuck to the game plan, chopped down Tony Ferguson with some leg kicks, but the main weapons was his hook and his left and right hook, the looping overhand, the left hook. The coolest part of not having any fan noise was to hear the ferocity and the power of Justin Gaethje's punches, and you could hear it when he exhaled, and it was just a whoosh and a miss, and it was pretty amazing to see. Tony Ferguson took a ton of damage, and he just didn't seem right from the start. He landed a couple of jabs, a couple of kicks, and that was really it. It was really Justin's game plan, and he missed the crowd in this fight. Cejudo needed some fans. It would have been amazing to see him retire in front of a huge crowd and get the applause, and maybe some tears would have come out. Maybe the fans would have brought that out of Cejudo. Gaethje, on the other hand, it would have been the oohs and the ahs, no booze, but the oohs and the ahs with every wing and miss and every punch that connected against Tony Ferguson. It was just incredible. And then when you hear this advice from Trevor Whitman, it just cements home the journey these two have been to bring another belt to their gym. Rose Namajunas brought a couple of belts against Joanna Jędrzejczyk to their gym out in Denver, and now Gaethje brings a belt. And what's next? What's next? We'll get into that on the next episode. I don't want to take anything away from Gaethje, but Conor, Khabib, what's going on? Who's hanging out there? We'll definitely talk about that and more on the next IkeTagon episode, again, presented by the Bleav Podcast Network. But we'll talk about that and more on the next episode, I promise, about the drama and the gossip. But moving down the card, Francis Ngannou is not scared of any man that steps in there to face him. He may be scared of Dana White and respects Dana White, but he is not scared of any other man that he has to face or square up with. And Jairzinho Rozenstruik was the next victim, a 22nd victim from Ngannou. I Bleav over his last 4 fights, the total fight time combined has been under 3 minutes. I Bleav it's like something like 2 minutes and 41 seconds. I tried to do the math. I was so excited on Saturday to get the tweet out, but I don't know if the math is correct. If it is, it's remarkable. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Junior Dos Santos, Cain Velasquez, what was it? Curtis Blades, and now Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Amazing. Francis Ngannou should be fighting for the UFC heavyweight title in his next fight, no doubt. DC and Stipe need to finish their business and get it over with already. And I'm saying it like it's not important. Believe me, I would love to see that fight now. Prime now. I would love to see that fight. And it's going to be exciting whenever it does happen. So Ngannou, holy goodness. And imagine if there was a crowd there. Woof, woof, woof. Those looping, leading hooks were just incredible. And wow, devastating. And Jairzinho, he needs to bounce back in a big way. He needs to take a lot of time off. I do not want to see him come back before December, November at the earliest, but he needs to take some time and collect himself, because Ngannou, hold on, I want to get this correct. They say that his punching power is equal to that of a Prius driving at 40 miles an hour. And I found this out when they were hyping the fight at UFC 220 against Stipe Miocic. It's like, okay, he hits as hard as a car. No, are you kidding me? If you're standing still in the middle of a road and a 40-mile-an-hour little Prius, I don't care if it's the size of a skateboard, hits you in the knee or hits you in the hip or hits you in the ribs, that's breaking your ribs. So Francis Ngannou could break your ribs, probably go through your body. Like how I said, Henry Cejudo was kicking along the same plane as Dominic Cruz, like those leg kicks, the same plane. If Francis Ngannou punched you in the ribs from one ribs, I think it's going through to the other side of your rib cage. So sorry for the brutal description, but Francis Ngannou, woof, And that was an amazing knockout. But in my opinion, I say this a lot on Twitter because I want people to know it's coming from my brain. Francis Ngannou's knockout over Jairzinho Rosenstruck at UFC 249 was not the knockout of the night. Hello, Calvin Kattar. Hello, Jeremy Stephens. Hello, Elbow. Goodbye, Elbow. Goodbye, Jeremy Stephens. Ouch, Jeremy Stephens. I'm sorry, Jeremy Stephens. Calvin Kattar, not Qatar, not Kata, as maybe some Boston people like to say in their choppy, nasally accent. I have a choppy, nasally Long Island accent, so maybe their Boston accent rubs me the wrong way, but hell of an elbow, a elbow. Oh my goodness. We've seen this from John Jones. We've seen this from Darren Till. What other elbow knockouts have there been? I'm sure another one will come to me, but oh my gosh, the elbow. Woo! At first I saw it the way the camera captured it. It was from the over-the-shoulder look, and it looked like a punch. It was so clean. And then when you look, you're like, wow, he really stepped in there deep for the elbow. In my opinion, I don't know who won the bonuses. I probably should doing an MMA show. But if Kattar didn't get knockout of the night, then I'm sorry. Ngannou, we've seen this before. It's two big guys throwing for two guys at 145 pounds to knock somebody out that clean, that efficiently. Give it to Kattar. Come on. What are we doing? You put this kid on the pay-per-view and he delivers, okay? Give the kid the knockout of the night and give him a bigger fight. Maybe a Josh Emmett, maybe a Ryan Hall. Some people want to push him into the top 5 already. No. We saw him against the top 5 guy, and he did not win when he had his chance. Yeah, he was coming on late against Zabit Magomedsharipov, but he did not capitalize on his opportunity. According to the guest last week, Eric Anders, he was saying that Calvin Kattar agreed to a 3-round fight over a 5-round fight. And if that's so, well, I don't think he'll do that again because he was en route to beating, or the tides were turning. He was gaining momentum in that fight, that main event fight in Russia against Zabit Magomedsharipov. But I don't think he's ready for Zabit. I don't think he's ready for Max Holloway, Brian Ortega, obviously Alexander Volkanovski, Yair Rodriguez. Maybe Yair, maybe that's a hell of a fight. That's a hell of a step up in competition. But let's find out what this kid could do. I don't remember the last time he knocked somebody out. I am lying to you. It was UFC 220. I was there. It was Shane Burgos, and Shane was not as seasoned as he is now in striking. Maybe run that fight back. Maybe two guys who have evolved, filling out their full game, standing and on the ground would be a great rematch. But Kattar versus top 5 guy, top 4 guy, not now. Not now. And I respect him as a fighter, and he seems like a cool customer outside of the cage, but I don't think he'll be calling for a top 5 guy. I don't think he will. But amazing knockout. Greg Hardy, what do you know? He fights, he wins. He fights, he wins. He fights, he screws up. He fights, he wins. He fights, he doesn't know the rules. He fights, he wins. Actually, he did lose to Alexander Volkov, so there is a loss in there. But Greg Hardy getting better. Day by day, week by week, month by month, fight by fight. He's getting better and he's growing. Watch him come back in about a month or so, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. But Hardy will be fighting before the end of July. No freaking doubt. So he got another win, avoids controversy. That's all he needs to do. Just win and avoid controversy. And he did it. So good job. In the ESPN, free on ESPN, main event, Cowboy Cerrone, who the UFC knows where to put, facing former UFC lightweight and WEC lightweight champion in Showtime, Anthony Pettis. Wow. It wasn't spectacular in the sense that we got an amazing finish. It was spectacular in the sense that we saw 2 elite martial artists free on ESPN displaying to the world jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, Taekwondo, black belt level stuff to a free, sport-hungry audience, and they delivered. It should have been a draw. That's where I'm pissed off because Both put their hearts on the line. Cowboy was embarrassed by Conor McGregor in his last fight. And I disagree with Stephen A. Smith and Ariel Helwani and Daniel Cormier on that front. I'm sure you guys have heard me how pissed and how adamant I am that Cowboy didn't receive respect for stepping in there. Just because he mentally wasn't there does not mean that he gave up, folded, quit, whatever the quote is, because a lot of people are screwing this up. One thing says that Stephen A. Smith says that Cowboy didn't show up, or he didn't show me anything. That's what it is, because Brendan Schaub's screwing this up too now. And it's crazy how bad people can be if they're not journalists or care about quotes or actual words, how dangerous that could be to somebody's career like Cowboy. I don't care if he said 2 days ago he wasn't there mentally. Don't tell me that he quit. His subconscious is not willing to let him quit. Okay? He got tagged early from Conor McGregor's hip. He got tagged from Conor McGregor's elbow, shoulder caps that we've never seen. And then he gets tagged by kicked, and then he gets pummeled by some punches. It was a perfect, outstanding performance from Conor McGregor, a former 2-division champion, a guy who boxed the greatest boxer of all time. Give Cowboy a break in that sense. Praise McGregor. Don't take down somebody's reputation or the career. So Schaub recently was kind of just siding with Stephen A. Smith and essentially Ariel Helwani and Daniel Cormier. No, Rogan, I'm with you, brother. I'm with you. As much as I have my things to pick at you with, Rogan, I'm still with you. It is martial artists first. And this isn't basketball, baseball, or football where it's played with a ball and there's a game the next day, in 3 days, in 7 days. It's fighting. It's the most mentally crazy sport there is. You wait 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 months till you return in the cage, and sometimes 3 years till you return into the cage. And it's a ton of pressure, ton of mental stress and exercise and stamina required to be in there. Don't treat this like another sport, Mr. Stephen A. Smith, and essentially Ariel Helwani, and essentially Brendan Schaub. You see what the power of media and headlines and quotes can do? According to Damon Martin, I Bleav the quote that the great Damon Martin on MMA Fighting and formerly of Bloody Elbow is that Stephen A. Smith did say Cowboy gave up. He didn't give up in this fight against Anthony Pettis, okay? We need to get that clear and get these quotes and words straight. It pisses me off when people go by misinformation and hearsay. It's the game of telephone, and Cowboy Cerrone is losing in this. Nobody's prompting him up. The fact that he put on a hell of a performance with no audience, free on ESPN against a former UFC champion. Huh? Yeah, everybody forgets to mention that. We just want to rip apart and rip down people's reputation and their names. So get your facts straight, people. Moving on. Should have been a draw. Bryce Mitchell, hell of a grappler. Hell of a grappler. What did I say? A clinic he put on against Charles Rosa. Oh my gosh. But credit to Charles Rosa. He got out of the twister. He got out of the head and arm triangle several times. But Bryce Mitchell put on a Khabib-esque type of grappling clinic. And it was amazing. I can't wait to see what's next from this kid. Apparently, he's got camo shorts coming into the picture. I'm going to try to get my copy or purchase some shorts. How good is this kid? He's now 13-0, I Bleav. He's undefeated. He's a grappling prospect. We've seen Ortega, who was a grappling prospect, who was undefeated, who fought legends and then got pushed into a title fight. We saw how far he could go, and we're still waiting to see how far he can go. Waiting to see where Ortega can come. But Bryce Mitchell now starting to get into the conversation for greatest grapplers or active grapplers in the UFC with Brian Ortega and Kron Gracie and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Oh my goodness, Bryce. Whoa, baby. I'm flustered here, man. Good job putting on the clinic, man, at 145 pounds in a stacked division. You know what I want to see? No, I don't want to see this, because this is how you kill off two people. We asked about this with Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou back at UFC 226 when it's the fast risers and they're both marketable. Where do you put them? The UFC put Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou together, and they just canceled each other out, and it was the most boring fight in UFC history, in my opinion. And I don't want to see Bryce Mitchell against Calvin Kattar, because what are we going to get? We're going to get Bryce Mitchell's mediocre striking against Calvin Kattar's mediocre grappling, and it's Khabib and Conor 2, and the grappler's going to win, and now Calvin's all the way back down the food chain. I hope they don't make that at 145 pounds, but man, it's 145 pounds starting to be one of the thickest divisions and most entertaining divisions. Look at boxing. Manny Pacquiao, Keith Thurman, Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Mayweather, was it Miguel Cotto, Shane Mosley? You got all these fighters around 145 and 153, 155 pounds that you could rearrange and have some fun with. What's next for Bryce Mitchell? He should fight. If BJ Penn was still going, that'd be the fight. Some legend to prompt him up or make him a main event or build his name up a lot. I don't know who is a legend at 145 pounds or a big enough name to get Bryce Mitchell going. Let me do some research real quickly. UFC featherweight division. Let's go. Here we go. For you listening on audio, my apology. Oh, yeah, Korean Zombie. I forgot all about him, guys. I forgot all about him. That's my bad. You know what? Let's find out who the real deal is. Ryan Hall versus Bryce Mitchell. Do it, UFC. Do it, Dana White. Do it, Sean Shelby. Do it, Mick Maynard. I just made it for you. You're welcome. Cutting promos left and right for you guys on this damn show. IkeTagon, episode 17, in cahoots, in coordination, simulcasted on the Bleav podcast network. So, hell of a card. And I'm not going to get to all the fights, but you guys should tune in if you haven't. I'm going to address one more fight, and that is Vincent Luque versus Nico Price. Oh, my goodness. This could have been a co-main event on a ESPN Plus card, no doubt. And this fight should have got a lot more attention. Wow, two warriors, two guys that are just willing to stand in the pocket and not give up and point to the floor like a Max Holloway and throw down. Unbelievable fight. I picked right, so I like the results more, but I like Nico Price. I really do. And how can you not like him after his up-kick knockout against James Vick? What was it, October? I remember having a watch party because my boy was in town for a wedding. Who will be on the IkeTagon in a day or two? You guys will get to hear about that. So, wow, hell of a fight. And you hope Nico Price builds himself up. You see that Vincent Luque learned a lot of patience from his last fight against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at UFC 244. When's the last time Vincent Luque has had a boring fight? I mean, the Brian Barberena fight put him on the radar for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, you can't lose with this guy. I would love to see Vincent. Oh, yeah, and he beat up, Mike Perry. I would love to see Vincent Luque versus Jeff Neal, 170 pounds, get it done. Or if Cowboy needs a little time, if RDA, Rafael Dos Santos, needs a little time, and they think they could get a win off a guy that they figured out his game plan but will be a hell of a fight, as long as they don't underestimate Vincent Luque, that's their guy. But Nico Price, back to the drawing board a little. I saw it as very easy to pick because I felt it's just going to come down to who's more patient. We obviously know they're brawlers and willing to throw down in the pocket at any time they must, desire, anytime it just comes. I mean, I don't think they choose when they throw down. I think Vincent Luque did choose to hold back and not throw down. You know, They're willing to throw down all the time, but can they pull it back just a little? And I think Vincent Luque did, and that patience showed with that counter left hook to the jaw of Nico Price and then following it up with a bunch of punches. It was a great stoppage. Saved Nico Price. He's a very entertaining, sellable fighter for the UFC, and this proved that he will give you action. Win, lose, or draw, he will have action-packed fights. The biggest takeaway for this fight for me, guys, is that with no crowd noise, this was the fight that had the most connection in terms of heavy, heavy strikes. I know Justin Gaethje landed a bunch of punches, but the punches have a glove on it. This fight had the most leg kicks and check leg kicks and clicking and clacking and shin bones and jaws cracking and hearing it with no crowd. It was kind of queasy and kind of scary. And I was like, man, this sport is wild. And to credit Joe Rogan, he always makes this beautiful description about UFC and MMA. It's just two guys throwing bones. That's it, just clanging bones. And it was never more prevalent than in this fight with Vincent Luque and Nico Price. And it was scary. And like I said, it made me a little queasy. And I was queasy, a little easy. Yo, it's Dreezy. I'm just kidding with y'all. But it was weird and it was surreal. And I think the crowd noise, the bed of the crowd noise and the crowd murmurs and stuff, I think that covers this up. And it was scary. I really had this thought. I was like, man, this sport is it's a heck of a sport. I don't know how good it is for the body. I mean, you must prepare for battle with this sport. If you're just trying to roll out of your bed into a cage, I think you underestimate how important it is to train and condition and not only mentally prepare, but physically prepare your shins and your wrists and your elbows and your jaw just for the beating, the sheer violence that this sport has. And it was never more prevalent than in that fight. I'm telling you, just listen to the first or second round. I'm not sure it went into the third round, but just listen to the first couple of minutes of the fight and just listen to the bone cracking and the bone shattering noises. It was unique, to say the least. But my biggest issue and the hottest take of the IkeTagon is Mr. Ariel Helwani. He will have a chance to defend himself and correct himself, but he is at the point he is very close to being a black belt, if not a second-degree black belt in media and word choice. Ariel Helwani had this to say about having no fans in the stands.
Can I be honest? I actually liked it better without fans.
Dude, I told Joe Rogan that at the end. I was like, Joe, I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it.
I know, and I don't want the fans to think I'm insulting them, but there's moments in fights with big crowds that get me upset, like when the fans start booing, when there's like a minute of non-action, right? Or when there's a close call and then the guy's on the microphone afterwards and he's being booed and he has to apologize. We didn't have any of that. None of that was a factor. And once you're watching the fights from home, you don't really notice because they do a great job of blacking out everything else. It's all focused on the cage. I did not miss them. In fact, I had to remind myself that there were no fans there. I did not miss them one bit.
So Helwani tries to cover his tracks up a little by saying, if the fans see a boring fight, maybe a grappling heavy fight, maybe then they would boo and that could have happened. I'll make the connection, essentially the Bryce Mitchell fight. Maybe there could have been some booing for uneducated fans, which would have been fine because the fans, the majority on the broadcast, would have heard Joe Rogan defend the action and defend the martial arts that was being displayed. But Ariel, you're going to say that you didn't want to see a crowd there to see Francis Ngannou's knockout, to see the amazing back and forth battle, which eventually led to a knockout in the Vincent Luque and Nico Price fight, that you didn't want to see two amazing elite well-respected martial artists, maybe not for you or Stephen A. Smith, between Donald Cowboy Cerrone and Anthony Pettis throwing bones, man. You didn't want to see a crowd for that? You didn't want to see the crowd get behind Justin Gaethje with every winging, ooh and on, missing hook, and every hook that landed? You didn't want to see that, brother? You're wrong, and you owe the fans an apology, because as the face of MMA media, it's sad when we hear stuff like this.
I did not miss them. In fact, I had to remind myself that there were no fans there. I did not miss them one bit.
Stop. You jumped on Stephen A's bandwagon because, I don't know, maybe he's going to come on the show again in a future podcast or something. But I can't let you say that the sport is better or the event was better. You didn't say the sport, but you did say the event, and you enjoyed the 249 experience without fans. Can't let that slip away. That's a bad take by you, my friend. I respect the hell out of you, and you are the man in MMA media, and I respect the grind and your rise and your confrontation and your run-ins with UFC management, Dana White, and you've played it off well, and you've been a perfect example of how to conduct yourself publicly until this. I think you get a co-host in Daniel Cormier and you're feeling yourself a little too much, and maybe you have him to double down on your opinions. But, dude, to say what'd you say exactly?
I did not miss them. In fact, I had to remind myself that there were no fans there. I did not miss them one bit.
To say that you didn't miss the fans one bit, the fans that have prompted you up, the fans that go to your Chicago UFC 238 and your Vegas UFC 245 fan experience or shows, to say you didn't miss those people that help prompt you up and give you all those followers and attention, it's a bad job. And that's disrespecting us, the fans, and MMA media as a whole. So bad take. So, guys, that was the IkeTagon simulcasted with the Bleav podcast network. You're welcome. Okay, that's all I say. I put my heart, my effort on the line. Watch The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, because that will teach you how to be a teammate and be a competitor. I've been a great teammate and competitor long before I've seen The Last Dance, but for all yous out there that think you know what you're doing on a team, business-wise, sports team, podcast-wise, y'all have no idea, and that's all I got to say. But we got some guests coming up. The great, the wonderful former coworker, a friend of mine. He's doing his own podcast, video series or interview series. Brian McKeon, following him on Twitter @_Brian McKeon. And my boy, my friend, my colleague, the great @Robbie Rosenhaus will be joining me next. So stick around. Trust me, you want to stick around. There's some drama that ensues. And I hope you guys like the new product that I'll be pushing out there. All right? Enjoy. We are rolling. What's up, Brian McKeon, host of Let's Talk? You just had a great guest, and John Kincaid, CBS Sports Radio's, and Atlanta's John Kincaid. If I remember, it's 680, right? The call.
680 The Fan.
680 in Atlanta. And we're joined by the always late Robbie Rosenhaus, who's now becoming a big-time contributor to the IkeTagon. What's up, Robbie? I was trying to make us all at the same time, 3:45. Can you get the connection there?
Yes, no, I understand it. It's also 35 minutes before my favorite time of the day. But again, we can do math. We can do math off the air after this week's episode of the IkeTagon.
Oh, what's up, guys? And those of probably everybody doesn't know that we all met under the 345 umbrella, which is WFN and CBS Sports Radio Network. But we're together again, man. This is a nice little reunion.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So, McKeon, how's it going with the Let's Talk podcast? You just did your first episode. Are you more bougier and arrogant now that you've talked to John Kincaid?
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
just kidding.
My ego is completely out of control at this point. It's amazing. This interview series has been an idea that I've had in my head for a while now, to just be able to – I feel like we don't see this a lot in the sports radio world, where you're a fan of sports radio and you don't know anything about the lives of these people, the hosts, and where they've came from and how they've gotten to this point that they're at. And I feel like, you know, we hear all about all their sports opinions. We don't know anything about their lives. So I've had this vision for a while of I wanted to find out more about these guys' lives and find out what they're like behind the microphone. So I think that's where I'm going with this whole interview series. And there's going to be a lot more interviews to come after John Kincaid.
Who's going to be the next interview?
We're still reaching out to a bunch of different guests around the country and a bunch of different hosts, and we're going to see who fits our next profile yet. So we're not ready to announce that quite yet.
And what's going on with you, Robbie? Are you still traveling into the city to work for your and mine's favorite politician, Michael Bloomberg, or former politician?
But I'm more interested to hear about who the next guest is on Mr. McKeon's show, because that's intriguing stuff. I like his premise there. But as far as me, yeah, nothing has changed in the last week, except we have more people that are not alive here in the state of New York. But again, this is not a COVID-19 IkeTagon. This is for other stuff. But no, nothing has changed. And
you're the only one who didn't watch the freaking Last Dance, man. You're reading recaps. You're going to binge on Sunday. McKeon, me and McKeon were talking about this before you got on, man. You got to watch this week to week. It's like,
I was hearing about this. Robbie, I got to call you to the carpet here. How are you the only person that hasn't watched this week by week? What else are you doing with your life at 9 p.m. on a Sunday where you don't have time to turn the ESPN on and watch it? It's the only thing on television at that time.
So I'm going to give you a little synopsis. You have a little bit of fake news there. So I have watched every week live on ESPN. It just so happened that this week I had a house full of people who wanted to watch a specific WWE pay-per-view, Money in the Bank, and the doorbell's ringing. I'm not.
Are they coming to collect their the pay-per-view fee?
Listen, this is real life stuff.
Oh, hey, how you guys doing?
This is live Zooming.
What's that? Hold on. Hey, guys, I got to go.
Come back soon.
Okay.
Oh, man. The Robbie never disappoints, man. Do you have any Robbie Rosenhaus stories from 345?
Not as crazy as walking out in the middle of a show. I don't think I've had any of those stories.
He's come on in the middle. He was doing, he's most famous for being the huge freeze on the Damon Amendola show. And they had a whole segment where Robbie was supposed to be there at the 20 of the hour. And I think he got there at the 50, and he was only on air for 5 minutes. Like, they were doing the live play-by-play of what Robbie's going through and reading his text. So Robbie having in-interview or in-show other circumstances on his mind is not unusual.
If you're 5 minutes early, you're considered late. So
that's from the drum line, right?
You just always got to try and be on time.
Oh, geez. All right, let's talk some real stuff, man. So this question popped up as soon as I saw what you were doing. Again, the Let's Talk. Is it a podcast? Is it a show?
It's a video series. I guess it can be in podcast form, but we've chosen to release it as a video series.
And I like how it's changed. Like, Netflix now is considered TV and podcasts now are considered radio. And it's like, you gotta, because especially podcasts are going live on YouTube or Zoom or wherever. It's like, it can be radio, man. What is it going to take? Like the Mike Francesa or the Jim Romes to just be solely on an app or a podcast for it to be considered radio? I think it is radio, and I think Netflix is TV.
It's crazy the way that the world and the landscape of content has really changed over the years, because you're really seeing that people are now have the ability to watch their favorite show on the train on the way to work, or listen to their favorite radio show on the train on the way to work. It's no longer appointment television. You don't have to be there at that certain time anymore. You can tune in whenever you want. So I think that was what our goal was, trying to make it available to as many people as possible at whatever time of their convenience. But again, like that's what I was going for with this thing is you want to see the behind the scenes of these people's lives, especially people like, a John Kincaid or any of these hosts that we have around the country. These guys have very interesting lives, and they've covered a lot of big stories in their careers. So I thought it was just something that we'd like to hear more of that we don't get to hear of on the radio side.
100%, man. And a Robbie text comes in, but I'm not even going to feed into it. Maybe after this question or during your answer, I'll look at it. Dude, the whole thing about like attention, I've done so many in-studio interviews with fighters, with personalities, with radio hosts. And it drives now. Are you getting a message? It drives me nuts, man. The attention span. I see somebody like looking around the room, unmuting the button like BT, Brandon Tierney, the on and off. And I'm like, I don't know if it's a radio thing, but our attention spans are very scattered. We're good listeners. We're excellent listeners, but it's like we don't maybe give the satisfaction to look like
it must be something that's bred in that radio personality world, I guess.
All right,
Yeah.
short and sweet answer. But did you find any correlation, connection, maybe some mentorship by listening to the Al Dukes podcast? I don't know if he does it anymore, but he used to do a series where just interview radio personalities or people in the biz, like a Mark Chernoff, a Mark Mason, outside of the Scott Farrells, the Jerry Greccos, the Craig Cartons, the Damon Amendolaras. And same thing, man. This is what I want to get with you. Maybe you could be Al Dukes 2.0.
Yeah, I've tried. I mean, I don't know if I hold the name of Al Dukes quite yet, in the field, but it's the same kind of concept that he went with that podcast. And I know that podcast kind of took off a little bit when he was getting stories out of these behind the scenes radio guys that you never heard before and that weren't even necessarily be brought up on the radio. You know, like a guy like Craig Cartons opens his show up in the morning and he's talking about the Yankee game last night or the Met game or the biggest story in sports. He's not going to open it up talking about a time that he interviewed Donovan McNabb about when he threw up on the field at the Super Bowl. You know, like but he has that story still ingrained in his mind. That's what I want to get out of these guys. I want to get these crazy stories of when they've been on the field before games and when they've interviewed players and when they've been at parties late at night and they've seen athletes walk in. I want to get those kind of stories out of these guys that normally you don't hear. And another thing that I found interesting that I think you might be interested in, finding out what these guys are like watching sports in their own house, because I think all of us crazy sports fans react different ways. I know you've got the crazy guys that throw remotes to televisions, and then you got the guys that sit there in the silent panic and hoping that something good is going to happen. So that's what I'm very interested in finding out, like how these guys react to sports differently, because there's a whole breed of sports fan that's different out there.
Wow. And that's amazing, man. I do want to find out more. I mean, how big are you going to go? Are you going to go all the way up to the Franceses and the Jim Romes? Like how far do you want to go? And
we'll see if they're willing to come on and we can get out to them and you know, depending. I mean, we're going to reach out to everyone that's possible that would be interested in doing this. I mean, these are tough times we're living in, obviously, and this gives people something, a chance to watch something, to be interested in something, and to look forward to something week to week. So we're going to go for the biggest names in each city around the country and, you know, just move around and get to know these people a little better.
And Brian, one of the guys that you're probably going to interview because of his talent and his prowess inside of the podcast and radio business is probably Robbie Rosenhaus. But let's hope it's from a studio, not from a jail cell, because Robbie just sent a text about why he couldn't continue the IkeTagon episode.
WWE pay-per-view, Money in the Bank, and the doorbell's ringing. I'm not.
Are they coming to collect their pay-per-view fee?
Listen, this is real life stuff.
Oh, hey, how you guys doing?
This is live Zooming.
What's that? Hold on. Hey, guys, I got to go.
The cops are at his front door. There's some type of dispute. He's going to get on into that and more next week on next week's IkeTagon. So because of technical difficulties and the connection's not coming through, Brian, we're going to have to stop there. We'll continue the conversation. Again, that's Brian McKeon @_Brian McKeon on Twitter. The Let's Talk video series. He just interviewed the great, fantastic, fabulous John Kincaid. Awesome interview. Ton of insight. If you guys know who Al Dukes is, he's the WFAN morning producer. He's fantastic producer, an amazing on-air producer, and he had a podcast series, which we were alluding to a couple of minutes ago, which showcased Al interviewing some of radio's finest personalities and most entertaining and most brashest personalities, which included Scott Farrell, Craig Carton, WFAN program directing great Mark Chernoff, and it was a ton of insight. Like Brian was saying, it wasn't just about last night's game. It was about their thoughts about the business and some interviews or some of their more poignant career stories. So a ton of insight from the Al Dukes podcast. and he has stopped that podcast for whatever reason. But hopefully the young, the talented, the fantastic Brian McKeon, again, @_Brian McKeon, can pick off where Al left off. And I Bleav he will. He's wildly entertaining. Hopefully we have him on next week. I know Brian is he's low right now in the biz, and he said he'll be on next week. But who knows, maybe in the future he'll big time us if we have some technical difficulties. But let's get to some drama with Robbie Rosenhaus. He said that he couldn't answer or continue the podcast because the cops answered his door. Well, here's the text that I was going to read to Brian, but you're seeing it now. I don't need to explain much more. Robbie will explain everything and much more. We'll recap The Last Dance, hopefully with Brian and Robbie next week, and we'll find out what this story means with the cops. But hell of a show. You recap for UFC 249, and great time talking to some of my buds, Brian McKeon and @Robbie Rosenhaus on Twitter. So thank you guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in tonight. The UFC fights continue. Roll on. So more fights and more interviews from some of my buds. Some of them are in the business, some of them outside the business, but let's keep the IkeTagon rolling. And again, thank you, Bleav Podcast Network, for scooping up the IkeTagon and simulcasting it on your wonderful podcast network and website. So thank you guys, and till next time. No, I'm not even gonna say it. Later.